The first time Noah saw it, he dismissed it as a trick of the fading light. He was walking home from a late shift at the diner, the street lamps casting long, skeletal shadows from the bare winter trees. He'd felt a prickle on the back of his neck, that familiar instinct that told him he was being watched. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw it, a shape at the edge of his vision, darker than the surrounding gloom, elongated and wavering like heat rising off asphalt. It flickered for a moment, then vanished. "Just nerves," he muttered to himself, quickening his pace. The late shifts always did this to him, made him jumpy. The diner was an old place, full of shadows that played tricks in the periphery, and the stories the old-timers told, ghost stories, mostly, sometimes lingered in the air like the smell of stale coffee. But the feeling persisted. Even after he'd locked his apartment door, the sensation of being observed clung to him. He checked the window, the fire escape, even his own reflection in the darkened glass, but there was nothing. He chalked it up to stress, poured himself a stiff drink and tried to forget about it. The next night it happened again. He was walking Sarah home after their weekly movie night. The street was brighter this time, illuminated by the cheerful glow of storefronts still open late. They were laughing about a particularly ridiculous scene in the film, Noah feeling light and easy when he saw it again. This time it was clearer. It wasn't just a fleeting shadow. It was a figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing near the mouth of an alleyway. It was amorphous, its edges blurring into the darkness, constantly shifting and reforming like smoke caught in a breeze. It was vaguely humanoid, he thought, but twisted, elongated, wrong. "Did you see that?" Noah asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. Sarah looked at him, concern furrowing her brow. "See what, Noah?" "Just an alley." He pointed, but the spot was empty. There was something there. A shadow. Like a person, but not. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Noah, are you okay? You seem tense lately." "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Long shifts, you know." He told himself he was overreacting, that it was just his imagination running wild. But a cold tendril of fear was beginning to coil in his gut. Over the next few nights, the figure became a constant companion on his walks home. It was always at a distance, lurking in the shadows, standing at the corners of buildings, a silent, watchful presence. He tried to ignore it, to convince himself it was just paranoia, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more oppressive. He started changing his routes home, taking well-lit streets, sticking to busier areas. But it didn't matter. The figure was always there, somehow, impossibly, always just at the edge of his perception. He'd catch glimpses of it in shop windows, reflected in car doors, always out of the corner of his eye, a dark, shifting shape that seemed to exist only for him. Sleep became a fractured, uneasy thing. He'd lie in bed, his heart pounding, convinced it was just outside his window watching him. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of leaves in the wind, sent a jolt of fear through him. One particularly restless night, he woke with a start, his heart hammering in his chest. He dreamt of the figure, not just as a distant observer, but closer, its shapeless face inches from his, a suffocating void of darkness. He sat up, gasping for air, and swung his legs out of bed, intending to get a glass of water. That's when he saw it in his reflection. His bedroom mirror was small, propped on his dresser, usually angled slightly downwards. He'd never liked looking at himself in it, but as he turned, his eye caught something in the glass, something behind his own sleep-disheveled image. There it was, the figure. It was standing in the reflection of his bedroom, behind his mirrored self, impossibly close. It was clearer than he'd ever seen it before, though still shifting and indistinct. Its shape mirrored his own stance, almost exactly, though stretched and distorted, as if his reflection had been pulled taut and twisted into something monstrous. He froze, breath catching in his throat. He didn't move, didn't dare to blink. He stared into his own reflected eyes, and saw the dark shape behind him move as well, mimicking his stillness. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it started to sway. Just a slight tremor, a gentle oscillation. He held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then he realized it wasn't swaying. It was breathing. He could see the faint, rhythmic expansion and contraction of its amorphous form in the mirror, like a shadowy lung inflating and deflating. It was alive, or something like it. Panic seized him. He stumbled back from the mirror, knocking over a stack of books that crashed to the floor with a loud thud. He whirled around, expecting to see it standing in his room, but there was nothing. Just the empty space, the scattered books, the pale moonlight filtering through the window. He rushed to the mirror again, heart pounding. It was still there, in the reflection, still mimicking his movements, its breathing still visible. But when he turned away, it was gone from the real world. It only existed in the reflection. But it was watching him. He knew it. He could feel its gaze, cold and unseen, even when he wasn't looking directly at the mirror. That night, sleep completely abandoned him. He sat huddled in his armchair, lights blazing, staring at the blank wall, terrified to look anywhere that might reflect his image. He felt trapped, hunted, by something he couldn't understand, something that seemed to exist only in the liminal spaces between reality and reflection. The next day at work, he was a mess. His hands trembled as he poured coffee, he kept jumping at sudden noises, and he couldn't focus on orders. His boss, a gruff but ultimately decent man named Frank, noticed almost immediately. "You all right, Noah?" Frank asked, leaning against the counter, his brow furrowed. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "Just tired, Frank," Noah mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Long nights." "Long nights doing what? Wrestling alligators?" Frank chuckled, but his eyes were still concerned. "Seriously, man, you look pale. You sick?" "No, I'm fine," Noah insisted, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. He couldn't tell Frank about the figure, about the reflection, about the feeling of being watched. He'd think he was crazy. Everyone would. But he couldn't keep living like this. The fear was consuming him, gnawing at his sanity. He needed help. He needed answers. There was only one person he could think of. Sophie. Sophie was his oldest friend. They'd been inseparable since childhood, sharing secrets, dreams, and late-night anxieties. She was smart, resourceful, and possessed an unnerving ability to dig up information on just about anything. If anyone could help him understand what was happening, it was Sophie. He called her during his lunch break, his voice trembling slightly. "Sophie, can you meet me tonight? I need to talk to you." "Noah? What's wrong? You sound awful." Her voice was instantly laced with concern. "I can't explain over the phone," he said, his voice low. "Just, please, meet me at the Raven at 7? "Of course," she said immediately. 7 at the Raven. See you then." He hung up, a sliver of hope flickering in the darkness that was closing in around him. Maybe Sophie could help. Maybe she could tell him he was just imagining things, that it was all just stress and exhaustion. Or maybe, just maybe, she could help him understand what this figure was and why it was following him. He just prayed it wasn't too late. Because with every passing night, he felt it getting closer. Not physically closer, not yet. But something else was happening. He felt himself weakening, becoming more drained, more paranoid. He felt like he was losing himself, piece by piece, to the unseen watcher in the shadows. And he was starting to fear that it wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting. The Raven was a dimly lit, cozy pub tucked away on a side street, a place where they'd spent countless hours over the years, talking, laughing, and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Sophie was already there when Noah arrived, perched on a stool at the bar, nursing a glass of red wine. She turned as he approached, her bright eyes immediately registering his distress. "Noah, you look terrible," she said, her voice full of concern. "What's going on?" He slid onto the stool next to her, signaling to the bartender for a beer. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. Where did he even begin? How could he explain something that sounded so utterly insane? I don't know how to explain this," he started, his voice hesitant. "But I think something is following me." Sophie raised an eyebrow, a skeptical look flickering across her face. "Following you? Like a stalker?" "No, not like that," Noah said, struggling for words. "It's a shadow. A figure. I see it every night when I walk home. It's always there in the shadows watching me." Sophie listened patiently as he described the figure, the shifting shape, the way it mirrored his movements, its appearance and reflections. He told her about the growing paranoia, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being drained and watched. As he spoke, he could see skepticism slowly give way to concern in her eyes. When he finished, she was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "Okay," she said finally, slowly. "Okay, Noah, let's just unpack this for a second. You're seeing a shadowy figure that follows you, and it appears in reflections. And you feel like it's draining you?" "Yes," Noah said, relief flooding him that she wasn't immediately dismissing him as crazy. "Yes, exactly. I know it sounds insane, but I swear to you, Sophie, it's real. I'm not imagining it." "I believe you," Sophie said, her voice serious. "I know you, Noah. You're not prone to flights of fancy. And you're clearly terrified. So let's assume for now that you're not hallucinating. Let's try to figure out what this could be." She took a sip of her wine, her gaze thoughtful. A shadow, in reflections, draining you? It almost sounds, almost, mythological. Mythological? Noah asked, confused. Yes, Sophie said. Like folklore. Supernatural. Have you thought about that? Maybe it's not something physical in the traditional sense. Noah had avoided thinking about the supernatural. It felt too unbelievable, too ridiculous. But as he looked at Sophie's serious face, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the ridiculous was the only explanation that made any sense. I don't know anything about that stuff, Noah admitted. Folklore? Supernatural beings? Well, maybe it's time to learn, Sophie said, her eyes narrowing in concentration. Let's think shadows, reflections. There are stories, myths, about beings that are tied to shadows, to reflections. Things that feed off people, drain their energy. She pulled out her phone, tapping at the screen with quick, efficient fingers. Okay, let's start with shadow creatures. Shadow people. Reflection demons. She scrolled through websites, reading aloud snippets of text. Shadow people are often described as tall, dark figures with no discernible features. They are often associated with feelings of dread and unease. Some theories suggest they are interdimensional beings, others believe they are manifestations of fear and paranoia. Noah listened, a chill creeping down his spine. It was eerily similar to what he was experiencing. That's kind of like it, he said, his voice hushed. Tall, dark figure, feelings of dread, reflections. Sophie continued reading. Reflection demons are often said to dwell in mirrors and other reflective surfaces. They are believed to be able to influence the real world through reflections, and some legends claim they can steal souls through mirrors. Steal souls? Noah repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Sophie, are you serious? Do you think it's something like that? I don't know what to think, Noah, Sophie said, putting down her phone. But we have to consider all possibilities. Look, folklore and mythology are often rooted in something real, something people have experienced. Maybe these are just stories, or maybe they're distorted accounts of something else. She leaned forward, her voice low and serious. Think about it, Noah. This figure, it follows you, it's in shadows and reflections, it makes you feel drained and paranoid. What if it's not just watching you? What if it's feeding on you? Draining your life force, your energy, your soul maybe? The idea was terrifying, but it also resonated with a disturbing truth. He did feel drained, weaker, more paranoid than he'd ever been. It was like something was slowly siphoning the life out of him. Okay, Noah said, his voice trembling slightly. Okay, let's say it is something like that. Something supernatural. What do we do? How do you fight something like that? Sophie took a deep breath. That's the tricky part. If it is something supernatural, then conventional methods probably won't work. We need to figure out what it is exactly and then see if there are any countermeasures, protections, anything. She picked up her phone again, tapping away furiously. Okay, let's dig deeper. Shadow creatures, reflection demons, soul stealers. We need to narrow this down. Are there any specific myths or legends that fit your description more closely? They spent the rest of the evening at the Raven, hunched over Sophie's phone, poring through websites, articles, and online forums searching for answers. They delved into folklore, mythology, urban legends, anything that might shed light on Noah's shadowy pursuer. The more they researched, the more unsettling it became. There were countless stories of shadow figures, reflection entities, creatures that drained life force, entities that replaced people. Some were vague, others disturbingly specific, echoing Noah's experiences with chilling accuracy. As the night wore on, Noah felt a glimmer of hope mixed with growing dread. Hope because Sophie was taking him seriously, because they were searching for answers, because he wasn't alone in this anymore. Dread because the more they learned, the more terrifying the possibilities became. And as they were leaving the Raven, walking out into the cool night air, Noah felt that familiar prickle on the back of his neck. He glanced around, and there, at the edge of the street lamp's glow, was the figure. Still distant, still shadowy, but undeniably present. And tonight it felt closer. Not just in distance, but in something else, something more insidious. He could feel its gaze, cold and heavy, not just watching him, but assessing him, measuring him. It was waiting, and it was getting ready to move. The next few days were a blur of frantic research and mounting fear. Sophie became his lifeline, spending hours online, digging through obscure texts, ancient myths, and forgotten folklore. She found references to creatures across cultures and time periods that bore chilling similarities to Noah's figure. shadow people, doppelgangers, reflection spirits, entities that drained life force and replaced their victims. One particular legend kept resurfacing, a fragmented, whispered myth from a forgotten corner of European folklore, referred to only as the Hallowed Ones. The details were scarce, shrouded in fear and superstition, but the core elements were terrifyingly relevant. They are born of shadow and silence, Sophie read aloud from a dusty online archive, her voice hushed. They are not of this world, but leech onto it, seeking sustenance from the living. They are drawn to weakness, to despair, to the fading light of life. They follow their chosen, patiently, relentlessly, until they are worn down, hollowed out. And then, they step forward and take their place. Noah listened, his blood running cold. Take their place? He whispered. What does that mean? Sophie frowned, scrolling further down the page. The text is fragmented, unclear. But it suggests replacement. That these beings, they don't just drain you, they become you. They take your life, your identity, your place in the world. Become me? Noah repeated, his voice rising in panic. You mean, like, possess me? Not exactly possession, Sophie said, her brow furrowed. More insidious. The legends suggest they don't just enter you, they overwrite you. They replace you entirely. Like, erasing a tape and recording over it. The analogy was horrifyingly apparent. It fit perfectly with the feeling Noah had been experiencing, the sense of losing himself, of being drained and hollowed out. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was something deeper, something fundamental. He felt like his very self was being eroded, replaced by something alien and cold. But why? Noah asked, his voice trembling. Why would they do this? What do they gain? Sophie shrugged, her expression grim. The legends are vague. Some say they crave life force, others say they seek entry into our world to experience life through us. Some even suggest they are reflections themselves, incomplete beings seeking to become whole by merging with a living soul. Reflections. Noah whispered, his gaze drifting to the darkened window of Sophie's apartment. The idea was chillingly plausible. The figure's obsession with reflections, its appearance only in mirrored surfaces. It all pointed to a connection to the world of reflections, the liminal space between reality and image. The legends say they are drawn to reflections, Sophie continued, her voice low. Mirrors, water, anything that shows a reflected image. They use them as portals, maybe? Ways to observe, to influence our world. And to choose their targets. Targets? Noah asked, his heart pounding. You think I was chosen? On purpose? It seems likely, Sophie said, her expression grave. The legends suggest they don't just attack randomly. They choose their targets carefully, picking those who are vulnerable, weak, emotionally or spiritually depleted. People who are open to their influence. Noah felt a wave of self-loathing wash over him. Vulnerable. Weak. Depleted. It was true. He'd been struggling for months, dealing with stress at work, loneliness, a general sense of emptiness. Had that made him a target? Had his own vulnerability somehow drawn this thing to him? But why me? He whispered. What did I do to deserve this? It's not about deserving, Noah, Sophie said, her voice firm. It's not about punishment. It's about opportunity. You were vulnerable and it saw an opening. That's all. It's not your fault. Her words were meant to be comforting, but they offered little solace. Fault or no fault, he was being hunted, stalked by something terrifying and incomprehensible, something that wanted to erase him, to replace him. And the worst part was, he could feel it getting closer. Every night, the figure seemed more solid, less shadowy. Its movements were becoming more deliberate, more confident. He no longer just glimpsed it in the periphery, he saw it directly, sometimes for seconds at a time. And its presence in reflections was becoming more pronounced, more intrusive. He'd catch it in shop windows, car mirrors, even in the polished surface of his phone screen. It was everywhere he looked, a constant, silent reminder of the threat that was closing in. One afternoon, while washing dishes in the diner's cramped kitchen, Noah caught his reflection in the stainless steel sink. He froze, staring at his own image, and saw it again behind him in the reflection. But this time it wasn't just mirroring his stance. It was reaching. Its shadowy hand, elongated and distorted, was extended towards his reflected back, hovering just inches away from his mirrored spine. He could see the faint outline of its fingers, impossibly long and thin, twitching slightly. It looked like it was about to touch him. Panic erupted in his chest. He stumbled back from the sink, knocking over a stack of plates that shattered on the tile floor. The clatter startled the other kitchen staff, who turned to stare at him in confusion. "Noah, you okay?" one of the cooks asked, his brow furrowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I'm fine," Noah stammered, his heart pounding. "Just clumsy." He quickly cleaned up the broken plates, his hands trembling so badly he could barely grip the broom. But he couldn't shake the image of the figure's reaching hand, the feeling that it was no longer just watching but preparing to act. That night he didn't even try to go home. He called Sophie, his voice choked with fear, and begged her to let him stay at her apartment. She agreed immediately, her voice laced with concern. When he arrived at her place, she was waiting for him, her face pale but determined. "Noah, we need to figure out what to do," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We can't just keep researching. It's getting closer, isn't it?" Noah nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. It's reaching for me now, Sophie." In the reflections, I think it's going to try to take me." Sophie took a deep breath, her gaze hardening. "Then we need to fight back. There has to be a way to stop it. There has to be something in these legends, some weakness, some protection." They spent the rest of the night poring over the fragmented texts again, searching for any hint of a solution. They looked for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, ways to ward off the hollowed ones, anything that could give Noah a fighting chance. And finally, buried deep in a particularly obscure and cryptic passage, they found something. A fleeting reference, almost an afterthought, but it was there. A mention of passing it on. But if the chosen one is strong of will or cunning of mind, there may be another path. To pass the burden, to deflect the shadow onto another. But this path is fraught with peril and carries a darkness of its own. Sophie read, her voice barely audible. "Pass it on?" Noah repeated, his voice hollow. "You mean, pass it to someone else? Make it follow someone else instead of me?" Sophie nodded slowly, her expression conflicted. "It seems so. But it's not clear how. And it warns of peril and darkness. It sounds morally questionable, to say the least." "Morally questionable?" Noah said, his voice rising in desperation. "Sophie, we're talking about my life here. This thing wants to erase me. If I can pass it to someone else, maybe I can survive." "But at what cost, Noah?" Sophie asked, her voice soft but firm. "You'd be condemning someone else to this. To being hunted, drained, replaced. Could you live with that?" Noah hesitated. The thought of condemning someone else to his fate was abhorrent. But the thought of being erased, of disappearing forever, it was equally terrifying. He was trapped between two impossible choices. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice desperate. "There has to be a way to fight it, to get rid of it without hurting anyone else." Sophie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We have to keep looking. There might be other protections, weaknesses we haven't found yet. But if we don't find anything, Noah, we need to consider all options. Even the ones we don't like." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. They both knew time was running out. The figure was getting closer, more aggressive. And the options were dwindling. Fight, pass it on, or be taken. Those were the choices. And failure, they both knew, meant disappearing forever. As they sat in silence, the dim light of Sophie's apartment casting long shadows around them, Noah felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He glanced at the darkened window, his heart pounding in his chest. And there, reflected in the glass, he saw it. The figure was no longer distant, no longer lurking in the shadows. It was standing right behind his reflection, impossibly close, its shadowy face inches from his mirrored face. And this time it wasn't just watching. It was smiling. A slow, cold, terrifying smile that stretched across its shapeless face, a promise of oblivion and replacement. And as Noah stared into his own reflected eyes, he knew with a chilling certainty that it was already closer than he thought. The smile in the reflection haunted Noah's dreams that night. It wasn't a smile of malice exactly, but something far colder, far more unsettling. It was a smile of inevitability, of triumph already assured. It was the smile of a predator that knew its prey was cornered, exhausted, and utterly defenseless. He woke up in Sophie's spare room, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. The room was still dark, the pre-dawn gloom pressing against the window panes. He lay in bed for a moment, his breath catching in his throat, listening to the silence of the apartment, trying to convince himself it was just a nightmare. But the dread lingered, cold and heavy in his gut. He knew it wasn't just a dream. The smile was real. The threat was real. And time was running out. He got out of bed, his limbs heavy and sluggish. He needed coffee, something to clear the fog from his mind, to give him the strength to face another day of fear and uncertainty. He stumbled into the kitchen, where Sophie was already awake, sitting at the table, hunched over her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Morning," she said, her voice subdued. "Didn't sleep well?" "Nightmare," Noah mumbled, heading for the coffee maker. "About, you know." Sophie nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. "Me too," she said quietly. "I stayed up most of the night still searching. I haven't found anything new, anything helpful." Noah felt a wave of despair wash over him. They were running out of time, running out of options, running out of hope. Fight, pass it on, or be taken. Those were still the only choices, and none of them were good. He poured himself a mug of coffee, the hot liquid burning his throat but doing little to warm the cold dread in his chest. He sat down at the table across from Sophie, staring blankly at her laptop screen. She was scrolling through another obscure website, filled with cryptic symbols and indecipherable text. "What are you looking at?" Noah asked, his voice flat. "More folklore," Sophie said, her voice strained. "I'm focusing on defenses. Protective rituals, wards, anything that might repel these things even temporarily. There are mentions of symbols, incantations, specific materials. It's a long shot, but it's worth trying." "Symbols? Incantations?" Noah asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. "Sophie, do you really think that stuff works? Magic? Rituals?" Sophie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, Noah. Honestly, I have no idea what works anymore. But we're out of conventional options. We've tried everything else. Maybe we need to try the unconventional." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation he felt in his own heart. They were grasping at straws, clinging to the faintest hope, even if it seemed ridiculous, even if it seemed impossible. "Okay," Noah said slowly, taking a deep breath. "Okay, let's try it. Symbols, incantations, whatever you can find. We'll try anything." Sophie nodded, a flicker of renewed determination in her eyes. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "Let's start with symbols. There are mentions of protective sigils, symbols that are said to ward off shadow creatures. We need to find some that are relevant to the Hallowed Ones specifically." They spent the rest of the morning immersed in research, focusing on symbols, sigils, and protective rituals. Sophie delved deeper into the folklore of the Hallowed Ones, searching for any mention of weaknesses or defenses. She found references to certain metals, specific herbs, ancient prayers, and symbols that were said to offer protection against shadow entities. One symbol in particular kept recurring, a complex, intricate design resembling a stylized eye enclosed within a circle of thorns. It was referred to as the Watcher's Ward, and was said to be a powerful symbol of protection against entities that preyed on the living, especially those from the shadow realm. "The Watcher's Ward," Sophie read aloud, her voice hushed with awe. "It is said to repel the shadow, to deflect the gaze of the unseen, to shield the wearer from the touch of the Hallowed Ones. It must be drawn with intent and belief and carried with faith." "The Watcher's Ward," Noah repeated, tracing the symbol on the screen with his finger. It was intricate, almost hypnotic, with a sense of ancient power radiating from its design. "Do you think it could work?" Sophie shrugged, her expression uncertain. "I don't know, Noah. It's just a symbol. But maybe it's worth a try. Maybe belief is part of it. Maybe if we believe in it, if we draw it with intent, it could offer some protection." "How do we draw it?" Noah asked. "What do we need?" Sophie scrolled further down the page. The text suggests, silver is the best material to draw it on. Silver is often associated with purity and protection in folklore. And it says, it should be drawn in moonlight, if possible, under the open sky, to empower it with lunar energy. Silver, moonlight, open sky. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, something fantastical and unreal. But they were desperate. They had to try something. "Okay," Noah said, his voice firming. "Okay, we'll do it. We'll find some silver, we'll draw the symbol, we'll try to believe. Anything is worth trying at this point." Sophie nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Tonight is a full moon," she said, her voice low. "Perfect timing." They spent the afternoon scouring antique shops and pawn stores, searching for something silver they could use. They finally found a tarnished silver locket in a dusty old pawn shop, its surface scratched and worn, but still undeniably silver. They bought it for a pittance, feeling a strange sense of purpose as they left the shop, clutching the small silver object in their hands. As evening approached, a nervous energy filled Sophie's apartment. They cleaned the locket, polishing it until it gleamed faintly in the dim light. Sophie printed out a large image of the Watcher's ward, studying its intricate details, committing it to memory. As darkness fell and the full moon rose high in the sky, casting its silvery glow over the city, they went out onto Sophie's small balcony. The air was cold and crisp, the night sky vast and silent above them. Sophie spread out a white cloth on the balcony railing, placing the silver locket in the center. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly, and picked up a thin charcoal pencil they'd bought earlier. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Here we go." She began to draw the Watcher's ward onto the silver locket, her hand moving slowly, deliberately, tracing the intricate lines of the symbol with meticulous care. The moonlight bathed the balcony in its pale glow, casting long shadows around them. As Sophie drew, a strange silence descended, a stillness that felt almost charged. When she finished, the symbol was etched onto the silver locket, the stylized eye gazing out from within its circle of thorns, catching the moonlight with a faint, ethereal shimmer. Sophie stepped back, her breath catching in her throat, and looked at Noah. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's done. The Watcher's ward. Now, we have to believe." Noah took the silver locket, his fingers trembling slightly. He looked at the symbol, at the intricate lines, at the watchful eye, and tried to summon belief, to will himself to have faith in its power. He closed his eyes, holding the locket tight in his hand, and whispered a silent prayer, a plea for protection, for deliverance from the shadow that was hunting him. When he opened his eyes, the moonlight seemed brighter, the symbol on the locket seemed to glow with a faint inner light. He didn't know if it would work, if it would offer any real protection. But for the first time in days, he felt a sliver of hope flicker in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, they had found a way to fight back. Maybe they weren't completely defenseless after all. He fastened the silver locket around his neck, feeling the cool metal against his skin, the weight of the symbol resting against his chest. He looked at Sophie, her eyes shining in the moonlight, and offered her a weak smile. "Let's go home," he said, his voice still trembling but with a newfound resolve. "Let's see if it works." They left Sophie's apartment, walking out into the night, the full moon casting long shadows before them. Noah clutched the silver locket under his shirt, feeling its coolness against his skin, whispering silent prayers of protection under his breath. He scanned the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest, bracing himself for the familiar sight of the figure. But as they walked, as they turned corners, as they passed through pools of darkness and light, there was nothing. No shadowy figure lurking at the edges of his vision. No cold prickle on the back of his neck. No sense of being watched. He walked all the way home, his steps hesitant at first, then gaining confidence with each passing block. He kept checking reflections, shop windows, car mirrors, expecting to see it, dreading to see it. But there was nothing. Just his own reflection, his own anxious face, nothing more. When he reached his apartment building, he stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around one last time, scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of the figure. But there was still nothing. Just the empty street, the silent buildings, the pale moonlight. He took a deep breath, a slow, shaky breath of relief. Maybe, just maybe, it was working. Maybe the Watcher's ward, the silver locket, the belief, whatever it was offering him some protection. Maybe he wasn't completely defenseless after all. He went inside, locked his apartment door, and leaned against it, his legs suddenly weak. He reached up and touched the silver locket under his shirt, feeling the cool metal against his skin, the weight of the symbol against his chest. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile whisper of possibility. Maybe he could fight back. Maybe he could survive this. Maybe he wasn't going to disappear forever. But as he opened his eyes and glanced towards his bedroom mirror, a cold wave of dread washed over him. Because there, reflected in the glass, standing behind his own exhausted image, was the figure. And this time it wasn't smiling. It was frowning. A slow, cold, terrifying frown that stretched across its shapeless face, a promise of anger and escalation. And as Noah stared into his own reflected eyes, he knew with a chilling certainty that the Watcher's ward, the silver locket, the hope, had only bought him time. And that time was quickly running out. The fight was far from over. It was just beginning.